Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast, talking all things movement, whole food nutrition and environmental wellness with your hosts, Ben and Emma.
Hello everybody and welcome to episode 23 of the Lentil Intervention Podcast. My name is Ben Adelberg, coming to you from Auckland and from Boona, joined by my co-host, Emma Strutt.
G'day Ben, how you going?
Good, thank you. Right, I'm very excited for this next guest because it's a slight little change or slight little tact in our general conversation. So I'll let you take it away with the introduction.
Okay. So far on the podcast, we've talked on numerous occasions about the impact of climate change on planetary health, but we wanted to give you more of a deep dive on how climate change impacts human health too. It's important to remember that we're part of the ecosystem, not above it. So an unhealthy planet equals unhealthy people. This is an important topic, and we've got quite the expert joining us today. Dr. Kate Wylie is an Aussie GP who helms the Climate Medicine website, which is just a brilliant resource for anyone that's interested. Please do check that out. She has completed the Climate Reality Leadership Program with Al Gore and is a member of Doctors for the Environment Australia. Dr. Wylie is an accredited education activity representative with the RACGP and regularly provides education for GPs and other health professionals on the health effects of climate change and their management. So we're very lucky to have Dr. Wylie joining us today. Kate, thank you so much for clearing some of your time in your busy schedule. We appreciate you chatting with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Emma. Thank you very much for inviting me, and hello to Ben. I hope you're well over there in New Zealand. I'm very excited to be here. Always happy to talk about climate and health and what we can do as humans to help ourselves and help our beautiful planet.
Now, you did tell me in an email that you have a minor affinity to New Zealand, Kate?
Yes, yeah. My father was born in New Zealand, so he was born near Dunedin. And so he came to Australia before I was born. But yeah, I'm a dual citizen, so I'm very happy to keep my New Zealand citizenship.
Yeah. Just to be safe, I suppose.
Well, New Zealand does things well. Let's just say that.
And you're in Adelaide.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, to kick things off, I look at your amazing website, as Emma has mentioned, climatemedicine.net, which will have the link in the show notes. Very jealous in the sense that you just put things out so beautifully. And I asked myself, are you a GP? Are you an environmentalist? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, and how you got to this point.
Yeah, okay. So I am a GP. I work in a small group practice in Adelaide, and I work part-time. And so I'm a very fortunate human because I've got, 2.5 days a week where I work, and then I have 2.5 days a week where I can pursue my passion, which is basically climate and health. About, 4 or 5 years ago, I joined Doctors for the Environment and started to get involved in climate action. I call myself an activist. And fundamentally, climate change is the greatest health problem facing humanity. And I'm a doctor. And so if I'm a doctor and I'm not doing something to address climate health, then I'm not really doing my job properly. I see this as an important part of my work as a doctor. And one of the ways, so I did climate medicine as a way to kind of get out into the community and share that message, because as a one-on-one consultation kind of thing, people aren't coming to see me for me to give them a big lecture about climate change. Do kind of weave it into the conversation a bit, but this is sort of my way of trying to make a difference in this space, basically.
And I think it is really important for everyone to understand that climate is a health issue that hasn't quite caught on in mainstream media as such, I don't think. So we really appreciate that you're doing this work. Tell us a little bit more about that. So how does climate change impact on human health?
Yeah, sure. So fundamentally, I'll just backtrack a bit. So climate change has sort of been taken over by the political sphere. In Australia, it's a highly politicised problem. It's become this left versus right argument. We're always talking about the economics, like how much is it going to cost, all of that sort of stuff. But in the end, all the things we're going to get from climate change and are getting now, like it's already here, are health problems. The World Medical Association has declared a climate emergency. Lots of medical associations in Australia have declared a climate emergency. And that's because basically because it is one. It's the biggest climate health problem of the 21st century. And the health effects are vast. It affects all parts of health, all body systems. It has respiratory effects, it has cardiovascular effects, infectious disease, etc., and it affects humans in all parts of our lifestyle. So it has effects on pregnancy, it has effects on children, adults, elderly people, all of that. So, it's vast. If you look on the website, I've listed what I see as sort of the big six, like the big broad stroke ones. And they're basically the effects of heat, the effects of fire and smoke, food and water, effects on breathing, infectious disease, and of course mental illness, because climate change is a very hard thing to look at and has vast effects on how we feel about things.
Yeah, I know from time to time I'm definitely suffering a bit of eco-anxiety, so experience that firsthand. Yeah.
Yeah, this podcast, talking about our own personal journey for Emma and myself, we've in the past, we've generally put a lot of focus on personal health through what we eat. But this podcast itself, through the likes of, we've had some amazing guests such as Dr. Mike Joy in New Zealand, Gerard Verderbom Bishop from Queensland especially. We've started making a bigger connection about the health of the environment and the health of ourselves. There's a direct correlation. And even in my own now work and presentations that I make, I no longer just talk about the effects of what we choose to eat or how we choose to live for our own health or even sporting performance, but now the direct correlation it has with the environment. When you talk about climate change, effects on health, one of the things you talk about is food and water. Water, we now know the effects of intensified farming, livestock farming, dairy farming, the effects it has on water quality, high rates of colorectal cancer in New Zealand because of that. So there's a massive, we've always assumed it's so disconnected, but there's a huge connection. And now coming from a health professional, for us, this is a first.
Yeah, right. Because, and I suppose that's the thing of how do we get information out to the world? Because, a lot of people in the medical community are really on top of this. Doctors for the Environment is their website's fabulous, lots of really good resources on there. And they've been trying to get action on this for a long time. The Climate and Health Alliance, there's another group in Australia that's really active. And when you look like the World Health Organization, they've got, lots of information. It's, like within the health community, lots of us are really involved. But, as you say, people aren't making those connections yet. We've still got this disconnect between climate change as this sort of far off problem that no one needs to worry about yet versus what I'm seeing is, people being affected by health on the ground in my practice today. So I see climate effects in my work, and I think lots of other doctors do too once they start to look for them.
So before we get into the detail, let's keep a bit more of an overview just for now. Tell us a little bit about where we're at right now and, the forecast over the next 5, 10, 15 years, because from a pure environmental point of view, we're now starting to get projections of where we're heading the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the impacts of deforestation, poor water quality, etc., the heating of the planet, and so on. But from your perspective, where do you think we're sitting right now? Where do you think we're heading within the more immediate future, 5 to 10 years, say?
So from a health perspective particularly, do you mean, Ben?
Yeah.
So I think we are seeing health effects now, as I said. So I think last summer's, catastrophic fires really brought home to us the health effects now. So all of the, that smoke inhalation and what that meant for so many people. We're certainly seeing the effects of heat waves now. So heat waves are Australia's most deadly natural disaster, and as the planet gets hotter, we're going to see more and more heat waves. I think over the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to really be confronted by the health effects of climate change. And in some ways, if we can make those connections in the population's mind, if people can see that, then that might help us act. That might help us create that paradigm shift that we need in the way that humans kind of relate to their planet, the way we use energy, the way we move our transport, all of that sort of stuff. Yeah, I hope so. I think the next 10 years are vital. You know, we are unfortunately alive at this extremely important time in human history. And, you know, I'm sure both of you have looked at the IPCC report, or, you know, the sort of the big headings of that. Yeah. And, you know, one of the things they basically say, you know, the 1.5 degree report, was that, you know, for us to have a 50% chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, we need to halve global emissions by 2030 and reach zero net emissions by 2050. And so that first half, we have to do that this decade. You know, the time is now. You know, acting on climate change is not a future problem. Acting on climate change is a current problem. And yeah, we've just got to get on and do it, right?
Yeah. 100%. And there was a really interesting report that came out earlier this week. I think it was looking at the perceptions of Australians when it comes to the government tackling climate change and, you know, the importance of coal and gas industries and whatnot. We've really got a lot of room to kind of make up on here. So there was an overestimation of a factor by 40. Like
that's the Climate as a Nation report by the Australian Institute.
Yes,
yeah.
So it's quite obvious that the oil and gas industries, they're doing their marketing well, because we're so overvaluing their importance to our GDP, and our employment. And that's a dangerous mindset to have, because as you said, we've got 10 years to make big changes.
Yeah, absolutely. What I found quite interesting about that report was that it shows how many people in Australia, and, you know, I would imagine New Zealand as well, Ben, are worried about climate change. They're like, we're all worried about it, and yet we're not really talking about it. It's like, it's the biggest elephant in the room.
I think it's also what you mentioned at the beginning, it's become so politicised. And we've just had our general elections. The Green Party did pretty well. You know, they got some good votes. But when you look at the two sort of more prominent parties, one is very pro-farming community, the National Party. And I think, you know, I can't verify this, so I'm not going to say this for sure, but from what I've heard, what I've read, is there was a lot of tactical voting whereby, you know, a lot of people knew the National Party was not going to win to get back in. The Labour was very likely to win, but the tactical voting was voting for Labour so that they would get that majority win and wouldn't need to govern with another party. Whereas the previous government was a coalition with the Green Party. So to try and minimise the impact of what the Green Party wants to bring in to try and counter this climate change. Yeah. So it is very much political. And, you know, you talk about in Australia, the effects of energy, I mean, coal and mining and so on. But here it's farming, livestock farming, dairy export is massive, beef and lamb. So different, but the same in terms of where we sit. A lot of people want change, but how do you actually action that change? We'll get into the action bit later, but that's where we're sitting right now. So you're right. It's. I think people do want change, but we're very slow because the system is kind of hindering that, I think.
Yeah, and, you know, how do I as one little person do something? I think people see it's just so big and overwhelming that it just kind of gets in the way. But yeah, we'll talk about actions later because I've got my list that I really like.
I think from a understanding climate change and the effect of health, do you want to talk a little bit about that list that you have, the key 6 elements: the heat, fire and smoke, food, water, air quality, infections, and mental illness? I think it'll be nice to sort of touch on a few key areas there.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, I'll start with heat. Obviously, as the planet gets hotter, and, it is getting hotter, and, projections say we might get 4 to 5 degrees of global warming by the end of this century, and we're currently at about 1 degree, and that's the mess we're in now. Heat is going to get hotter, and, heat waves are Australia's most deadly natural disaster. So when we have like a heat wave, so, it's 35 degrees or more for 3 or more days in a row, most of us are worried about the fires. Like for me, when it's really hot, I'm scared about the potential bushfire. I live on the edge of Adelaide, and, last summer we had fires in Cuddly Creek, which is just up the road from me, and that was pretty intimidating, right? It's really scary. But actually, it's the heat waves itself that causes more death, because humans aren't designed to withstand all this heat. And, we suffer from heat stroke, heat exhaustion, and also in heat waves, we're more likely to have heart attacks, we're more likely to have strokes. People get renal disease, because their kidneys can't cope with all the heat. And so, I think that's something that people really need to be aware of, to take heat seriously. And especially some groups are more vulnerable to heat than others. By far the most vulnerable group are elderly people. As we age, our body's ability to adapt to heat stress decreases. You're more likely to have an underlying disease, so more likely to have cardiovascular disease, more likely to have kidney disease, that kind of thing. Also more likely to be on medications that might impact on your ability to deal with heat. So, heat waves, I think, is something that all of us really need to be aware of. Do you want to ask me any questions about heat waves before I go on to the next one? No?
Maybe just really quickly for the listeners that are interested, if they're dealing with a heat wave, what can we do about it? Like, what's the best way that we can kind of try to combat that, apart from sitting inside with the aircon on?
Yeah, well, sitting inside with the aircon on is a really good idea.
Yeah.
But keeping hydrated is fundamental. So obviously keeping your fluids up, not going out in the heat of the day. So the other big vulnerable groups are homeless people, tradies, people that work outside because they've got increased exposure, and little kids, pregnant women, they're also very vulnerable. So you're trying to keep cool. Obviously not everybody can afford an air conditioner, and so like all the health effects of climate change do impact on people of socioeconomic disadvantage more strongly. Yeah. And so for some people, they can't afford the air conditioner. And so if that's the case for you, keeping wet is kind of the best way to cool yourself down. And so that's sitting in the bath, sitting with a cold flannel, putting your feet in cold water. Those sorts of things can help cool your body down.
Thank you. And it's quite significant, isn't it? I saw on your website it causes 1,100 deaths per year in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that number's obviously just going to keep going up.
Yeah. And never mind the impact on wildlife as well, livestock and so on. So it's far more reaching than just humans.
Yeah, far more reaching than just humans. Absolutely. Yeah. So obviously the other thing that we see in heat waves is the increased risk of fire, and I don't think there's anyone in Australia that wasn't touched by the catastrophic fires last summer. And
it happened in New Zealand. We had quite a few fires around, and we got to see the gift that Australia sent us with all that smoke as well. Pretty skyline, but actually that's affecting our air quality as well.
Yeah,
amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's the other thing, isn't it? I think last summer really showed us what smoke itself is as a problem as far as fires are concerned, and I certainly brought it home for me. Like fire itself is quite a terrifying thing, and of course we're all scared of being burnt. Like that's a human fear, isn't it? But the smoke inhalation, like there was that really interesting study that came out about smoke-related health burden from last summer's fires. Have either of you seen that one? It was published in the Medical Journal of Australia. Basically, they looked at the October, November, December, January last year and found that there was like 417 excess deaths from smoke inhalation in the last...
Yeah, and that was for East Coast states only, wasn't it? So it wasn't including SA, WA and the NT. So
yeah, it was that sort of bottom southeast part of it, Australia. Yeah. It's quite confronting, isn't it? Yeah. And so what do you do to protect yourself from that? You know, obviously we've all got face masks now, and you need to have like a good quality, proper face mask. But what do you do?
To be fair, face masks are not going to really do much, are they? I mean, it's a hard one. It's a hard one. I think you've got to rely on, I guess, bigger authorities. You know, when it comes to those that manage conservation land, making sure there's adequate fire breaks, that they burn, they do the burns that they need to sort of minimize the risk of spreading fire. You got to hope that, you know, local towns have got good warning systems. I mean, what can you do as an individual, really? You know, it's a hard one. It's something that just gets the better of you, as we've sadly seen.
Yeah, you need political action, don't you? You need, fire systems to be well funded. You need to be able to put a fire out really quickly, basically. Fire breaks, all of that sort of stuff. It's a whole of society problem, and that affects us all as individuals. And I suppose that's one of the very obvious health effects of climate change is the effects of smoke inhalation.
I mean, do we dare go deeper and go to the root cause? And, you know, having listened to so many good presentations and interviews on the ill effects of deforestation. Just our last episode, we spoke about the importance of soil quality and how much moisture that retains, and native forests and so on. So, there's in terms of the ecosystem, we're kind of leaving ourselves more susceptible to fires and heat waves even in some degree, because the effects it has on global warming, and then it comes back and bites us.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. We can't. All of these things are the same root cause, aren't they? We've got to stop burning fossil fuels, and we've got to stop deforesting the planet. Those two things are the fundamental crux of the issue. And so, with the heat, we have more droughts, then you lose the moisture in the soil. And so when there's a fire, they are stronger. They're harder to put out. We get these absolutely terrifying, catastrophic fires that we've had. And the type of farming that we have, if we don't have biodiversity in the forest, etc., then, I don't know a lot about that. I have to say that's not my area of expertise, but my sort of understanding is that then you have bigger, harder, scarier bushfires.
That is an outcome. And then the irony is, you say first effect is burning fossil fuels, second is deforestation, but we know deforestation is most likely because we're going to put more agriculture to farm, and then we're going to use even more fossil fuels in terms of fertilizers. So it's a whole vicious circle with fossil fuels and the outcomes of deforestation. So we don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I guess it's important to mention it because, like we said, we'll get onto the actions later on, but it's when you start asking questions, a lot of these questions, the answers kind of always lead back to almost the same point. So when we do talk about action, it's not that we're so obsessed about a particular path we want to take. It's because it makes sense. It's where it starts. There's no point, it's the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. It's the mopping of the floor as the tap hasn't been switched off. It's all those acronyms, and we need to understand where it's coming from and what's driving that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that leads into, the whole concepts of food and water insecurity. Climate change has massive effects on our water security. Hotter temperatures, less predictable weather. We know that, rainfall is decreasing, certainly in the bottom half of Australia, in the top half of Australia above the tropics. We're having more intense storms, but less commonly. And so that impacts on, When we flood, there's water insecurity as well because we lose our potable water. But obviously in droughts, that's an obvious water security problem. And, the same with food insecurity. Global food supplies are decreasing due to climate change. And so, that's about as obvious as it gets, isn't it? Not enough food, not enough water. How more obvious do we need it to be for us to take it seriously?
Well, we're still under water restrictions here in Auckland. And, just as a side, not that I want to go down this discussion path, but water insecurity especially is a big cause of wars, of big global wars,
Oh, absolutely. And, that's in our future.
Yeah.
You can see that coming
Which
now.
then has an even bigger impact on health. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And again, more disadvantaged groups are going to be more affected by that. And us in Australia and New Zealand, we're a little bit protected. We're, relatively wealthy countries, but we have climate change refugees now. Yeah. Like Pacific Islanders, the islands are sinking into the ocean. It's, it's a terrible human tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have spoken already in some of our past episodes about water quality. And even, a country like New Zealand, high rates of colorectal cancer, that's our beautiful, supposed clean water. And how much water can we keep buying? If we need to buy bottled water, which then compounds other issues with plastic pollution and everything else. So, it's so easy to get lost in this, but 100% food and water, something we take for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose I can segue quite neatly into the next thing we take for granted, which is breathing. Breathing's quite important, I think, as a GP. And
I think we'd all agree.
I think we can probably all, find some common ground there. And, burning fossil fuels is a major cause of pollution. And so, those, the smog gets into our lungs. It increases our risk of emphysema, all the respiratory diseases, increases our risk of lung cancer. Burning fossil fuels directly affects our health in that way. Air pollution also impacts on, fetal development, the health of placentas, all of that sort of stuff. So that's, scary and awful. And one of the other things we're really seeing with climate change is increase in the risk of asthma. So that's something that I see in my work, people who've never had asthma before now having asthma, and it's to do with the pollen count and hotter temperatures selecting for those plants that are more likely to be allergens to the respiratory system, basically. And so, and asthma is, a potentially fatal disease. People die of asthma all the time. Obviously, people with asthma, anyone who's listening, if you've got asthma, go and see your GP. We can help you manage it. We know what to do. But, breathing.
How can we safeguard our lungs? How can we, with increasing pollution and pollen and all that kind of stuff, is there something that we can do, other than locking ourselves up in an airtight capsule?
In our little bunkers, with our little snorkel going up. Things like if you're a cyclist, you shouldn't cycle on a main road. Like if you're cycling behind the bus, that's a bad idea. Cycle on the bike path. So even just being, a couple of streets back from the main roads, your pollution exposure will be less. There's a little bit work about, school drop-off. And when you drop the kids off in the cars and everybody's keeping their cars running, and the little kids are going past all those running cars, that they're being exposed to a whole heap of exhaust fumes.
Or never mind all the neighbourhood school walks then, where they're walking kids, because it's good to be active, but now we're exposing them to more pollution then.
Well, so it's particularly around those drop-off zones.
Right.
So what would be really good is not idling your car would be a simple thing that humans can do. Not standing next to an idling car would be a sensible thing for each individual human to do. Obviously, if we had less cars in total, that would be a fabulous thing. And so that comes back to town planning, subsidies for electric vehicles, using public transport as opposed to everybody driving their own car. The more people on bicycles, the less cars that are on the road. The more people walking, the less cars that are on the road. Don't smoke. Like if there's people out there that are still smoking, please stop smoking. It's a really bad idea. Yeah, those are the things.
Okay. Yeah. It's a bit of a catch-22 because, get on your bike as you're doing a bit for the environment, but then you're at this rate with the increased amount of vehicles on the road and old buses and trucks, you're doing harm to yourself.
Yeah, no, drive on the bike path. So my personal example is I ride my bike to work. I've got an electric bike, which I love. And there's one way I can drive where I go cycle where I go past 3 schools and there's a bus route. But there's another way that I can go, which is about 2 minutes longer on my bicycle, where I go back roads, hardly see another car, hardly see a car get to work. So it's just a matter of the path you choose.
Yeah.
I used to do the same when I was walking to work from the train. I'd used to go along the main road because that was the shortest route, but that was just terrible as far as breathing goes. So changed my route and found it slightly longer, but less busy. And it was light and day, the difference.
Mm.
Yeah. And it's better for you, a little bit longer walks with your heart.
Right.
Yeah.
Except when it's in the middle of a heat wave, then you want to take the shortest route.
Well, this is it. Then you have to have your hat
and your mask,
your water in your water bottle, and go to work a little bit earlier so it's in the cool of the day and not in the middle of the thing. Yeah. Lots of circular arguments, right?
Yeah. Finding all the problems, Ben, it's been difficult.
No, like when I think about it, Brisbane, for instance, fantastic. You've got the bike path that is completely separate, or the main one, along the river, fantastic. And now look at what they're doing in the Auckland CBD, and it's an absolute shambles. They're putting bike paths in, but then, it's alongside the roads, but now they're purposely slowing down the speed limit to 30 k's an hour. Every light is out of sync, so the cars are idling a lot more in the city. So they're trying to encourage more foot traffic and bikes, and I'm on my electric skateboard, I'm also trying to do my bit. But at the same time, the cars are sitting there longer rather than just getting through. So it's hard to get it all right, isn't it? Yeah,
that's a reasonable thing to be concerned about because, that could just be they could time the lights differently, couldn't they?
Yeah. So now the next one's a bit of an interesting one, considering the climate we're in right now.
So obviously, global warming and climate change impacts on infectious diseases. And, we're starting to see changes in distribution patterns of disease. The really big obvious ones there are the vector-borne diseases, so malaria and dengue, fever, and cholera is a major global problem, not a big problem for Australia and New Zealand. Yeah. There is this virus that you've probably all heard about called coronavirus. And
do tell us.
Have you heard of that one? Yeah. So the COVID-19 pandemic is an example, not so much of global warming, but a big reminder about planetary health. So, COVID-19 is a zoonotic. So that means it's a virus that used to live in animals and now it's jumped to humans. And because it's new to the human immune system, our immune system haven't known what to do with it, and it means it spreads rapidly, and we have the global COVID-19 pandemic that we have at the moment. And the thought is that because of deforestation, that has made us exposed to these zoonoses. And again, it comes back to our respect for the planet, the fact that we are just chopping down trees and increasing our risk of these diseases. And, COVID-19 is a really terrifying, scary disease. And, there'll be more. We've had other zoonoses, the other ones that are diseases like Ebola and HIV are both zoonoses. So these are diseases that we're all scared of. Like, who isn't scared of Ebola? What a terrifying condition. And, if we keep going, we're going to get more of these problems. Yeah.
And we already know the global impact that COVID-19 is having. Anything worse, and that's really going to be crippling. I mean,
Yeah.
it's global travel, global supply of food, of merchandise, all that. It's been impacted. We're living. I mean, I know in New Zealand and Australia, in most part, especially if you're not in Melbourne. Our apologies to our Melbourneites, but we've been lucky, but the rest of the world not so much. Now, next time round, how lucky is anyone going to be? So, yeah, it's not that we're trying to instill, fear or panic or anything, but it's something to be serious about.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think it shows that it is personal. Like it's not a problem that's happening to other people. It's not a problem that's in the future or a long way away or only matters on the other side of the globe. It's something that matters now, here, to all of us. Like, yes, Australia and New Zealand have been globally pretty lucky with COVID, and, our public health response has been fabulous. But, we look at it, we're still affected, in this country. As you say, people in Victoria, they're really affected, and we've all been affected anyway, haven't we? Mm-hmm. Like, it's scary. It's been a pretty scary phenomenon, and I suppose that's brings us really to the last of the big six, which is mental illness. Like global warming is causing immense human suffering, and so many of us, we're worried about it. So many of us have climate grief. So many of us suffer from eco-anxiety. I know I do. I know I worry about this all the time. It's, my big reason why I did climate medicine was to do something about it, to help myself not be so stressed about it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is important to, acknowledge that we have some major issues that we need to address, but at the same time, not to stress ourselves so much that we, experience burnout or spiraling depression. So what are some ways that we can combat this? What are your top tips there?
Fundamentally, talking about it. So acknowledging the problem, knowing you're not alone in it. I mean, like we all are concerned, and we're all, lots of us are anxious, but so many people are doing really good things. None of us want to die. None of us want society to break down. And so if we remember that we're not in it alone and, talk to our allies, I think taking action helps a lot. So finding the thing that you can do that helps you feel like you're part of the solution is, for me, the most helpful thing, and like you two are doing that now. You've started this podcast as a way of, shining a light on this kind of stuff and helping people, find solutions. So I think they're very important. But, if people do get to that point where depression is overwhelming, depression is a really serious condition. And if people are at that point where they're thinking that, the world might be better off without them, or what's the point really, please seek help. Please go to your doctor, or please go, call Lifeline, go to emergency department if you need it, because if you're someone with eco-anxiety, if you're someone with climate grief or solastalgia, then, we need the climate warriors. We need you on this planet to help. And so, please come and get help.
I think it's also important to mention one particular group that is very much affected by, the impacts of climate change and therefore mental illness, and that's the farming community.
Oh, absolutely.
Everyone's got their thoughts about farmers, and I think a lot of it's wrong. Farmers are there to supply and to assist, what they farm. Well, that's a different story. But the point is that irrespective of what you farm, they're severely impacted. And we know that there's a lot of concern for mental wellness, especially through severe drought or severe flooding even. So, I think it's just important to acknowledge that, there's certain, not just farmers, but particular groups especially that are very susceptible to it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair call, Ben. I think people that have profound connection to country, profound connections to land, when they see their land change, when they see the country change around them, how can you help but be brought down by that or affected by that? I think First Nations people find all of this really confronting. I'm not a First Nations person, and so I cannot speak for them, but I would like to, like I see that as something that must be an ongoing grief. Yeah.
No, that's important to note and be aware of.
And our governments really should be liaising with them more, making them part of the solution.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because like in Australia, New Zealand's a bit different because of, I think there was a treaty and there's a few things there.
Yeah.
But there's ongoing inequality, and I wouldn't want to, I don't really know enough about it to really speak. But in Australia, First Nations people have a terrible record. They've been treated really badly. We've stole their land. We haven't acknowledged that we've stolen their land, and they've been dispossessed and are probably suffering this concept of solastalgia, which is homesickness for your lost home while you're still there, for 200 years. Mm. Gosh, we're cheery.
Well, I'd like
so
to
what
think
can we
that
do?
we're turning a corner here. So we've, it is. I mean, we finished off with mental wellness, but it is important to be aware. So as much as it's things that I don't want to listen to this anymore, it's depressing, but it's about awareness, because if you're not impacted, the next person alongside you is. So awareness is important, but then as important is what can we do about it. So let's move forward now.
Okay, so look, there is lots that we can do, and that is the fundamental take home, is that we can do things. If we work together, we can save our planet, and I don't think we should give up. The future isn't written, and what we do now matters. What we do now changes the future of our planet. There's I've got 4 sort of big, broad things that I think we need to do as a group, like as a society, and then I've got 10 individual actions. So the 4 big, broad things are firstly declaring a climate emergency, and really what that means is acknowledging that there's a problem. So in medicine, like the first thing you have to do is make a diagnosis. If you don't know what the problem is, you can't treat it. So when it comes to climate change, we have to acknowledge the problem and name it, so then we can treat it. So first, let's declare a climate emergency. Now, lots of groups have done that. The Upper House of South Australia has done that. Various jurisdictions have done that. But, what I'd really love to see is our federal government declaring a climate emergency. I think it's a long way away, but I'd really love to see it. The next thing is a complete no-brainer, is we have to stop burning fossil fuels.
Yep.
Like coal, oil and gas are the major drivers of global warming. They're the fundamental cause of the climate crisis. We don't need them. Gosh, we don't need them. We have the technology now to replace them. We can get our power from renewable sources. We can get our transport from renewable sources. It's just this sort of furphy. It's this con that we need them. And so, let's stop burning them. Let's stop chopping down trees and reforest the planet. You've both heard, I'm sure, about the Trillion Trees project, that concept of basically, using trees to help draw down carbon. Photosynthesis, is that everyone's favourite?
We covered that very well with Shane Ward in our very last episode. So absolutely, and it's great to have that reiterated. So absolutely, if anyone wants to know more about that, the whole process of carbon and the drawdown and the aim of drawdown and reversing and so on, go back to our previous episode number 22. But back to you, Kate.
And then the last thing we need to do is protect our water sources.
Yeah.
So, without water, everything dies. And the world's getting hotter. And, you touched on before, Ben, about the concerns about climate wars, about water, like water wars. And, we need to protect water.
You've got 4 big points, but they're all 100% interrelated.
Yeah.
They're not in isolation. One impacts the next. So, deforestation, if you slow that, stop it and reforest, you're going to improve water quality as a direct result of that. You're going to help draw down on the carbon, the excess carbon. I mean, it's all interrelated, and that's important. Again, it's nothing is in isolation. It all works in a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're all part of that web, aren't we? And so when it comes to individual actions, what we all do impacts on the people around us. We have that ripple effect. we become part of the solution, not part of the problem. Because I think, you know, it's so easy to get overwhelmed. It's so easy to get disillusioned. It's so easy to think that, you know, I'm just one little human on the planet. You know, what can I do? How is what I do worth it? Like, why does it matter what I do? But of course it matters, because, you know, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. We need to have zero net emissions by 2050. That means everybody has to be involved. All of us need to do it together. And, you know, I think one of the beauties of COVID, which is a kind of almost a contradictory sentence, but one of the beauties is it's shown us that what humans can do if they work together, we're really powerful. We can create change. You know, so, you know, to the people in Victoria, I lived in Melbourne for 15 years, you know, well done. It must have been a really awful past 6 months for those people. But what they've done is they've turned that ship around. You know, so collective cooperative action matters. And then the other thing is, you know, like one person can be really powerful. You know, like Greta Thunberg is one person, and what a powerful person she is. She started the climate strikes, and that has become a global movement. So, you know, one person is very powerful depending on what they choose to do. Donald Trump, one person, very powerful. You know, so I really think that, you know, if a person decides, you know, they can have massive effects. So when it comes to, I've got a list of, 10 things I think everybody can do. The first one is we can all learn for our climate. Or, you know, just look it up. You know, it's not very hard. I think there's some great information out there. There's a link on my website to the emissions gap report, which has a lovely infographic on the fundamentals of the climate crisis. So, yeah, look it up. Number 2 is to talk for your climate. You know, as I said before, that, you know, research that came out this week by the Australian Institute, most Australians are worried about about climate change. We're all concerned. We're not talking about it. We need to talk about it so that we can work together. So let's talk about it.
I think, to be fair, for some people, it might be that they just they're not comfortable. You know, they want to do something, but they don't know how to express it or how to portray it. And I think going back to your first point, and that's what's important, is look up good resources like your website. I can't say that enough. Your website is just so perfect that even if they looked at a particular component of your page and said, okay, I'm going to remember that infographic or whatever, now I'm comfortable talking about it because it makes sense. I now understand how to explain it to someone. So, you know, I think it's you know, for a lot of people, it's about how. And how? Well, if you get comfortable with it, if you listen to our podcast, if you listen to other podcasts, if you read books and so on and educate yourself just through passion, you'll get it. And then you'll find it comfortable to talk about it.
Yeah, and also maybe, Ben, there's that thing of, you know, some people are easier to talk to than others. And so if you start maybe talking to people that are, you know, on the same page as you, and maybe not try to convert the
as opposed to a denial or something.
Yeah, because, you know, they're the last ones, you know, leave them till the end.
Yeah.
So those two are kind of linked, learn and talk for your climate. And then the next thing we can all do is we can eat for our climate. So I'm sure you two are all over this, but that concept of eating more plants and less meat. You know, you touched on before about cows and agriculture. Like, beef farming is by far the most destructive food, you know, because it causes deforestation. You know, we chop down all these trees to grow cattle. We chop down, you know, land clearing to grow the food to feed the cattle. And then the cattle burps and releases the methane, and, you know, around and around it goes. And so, you know, that's something that each person can make a choice about doing. The planetary health diet is a diet that's basically, it's not a no-meat diet, but it's a really low-meat diet. And that was formulated by the Eat Lancet Commission so that we could feed the world, our current population, with current resources.
Yeah.
So not living beyond planetary means. So, you know, it's there, we can do it.
And for our listeners, if they're questioning the connection, well, we had a podcast episode that spoke about the horrendous, ongoing, day-to-day deforestation happening in Queensland And yet what happened a year ago? Look at the horrendous fires that happened in Queensland. So, you can start joining the dots. And also, for me eating a whole food plant-based diet is a way of expressing the rationale as to why I'm eating that. So when we say talking about the climate, just eating and someone saying, well, why do you eat that? Or why do you eat like that? That's a way of expressing it as well.
Yeah. It's sort of like, it's a great way to sort of start that conversation.
Take them to a plant-based cafe as opposed to a general cafe. And that's makes the conversation. There's so many ways. I mean, yeah.
It's like if you're at a counter meal, don't get the surf and turf, get the veggie burger. Easy.
That's right. Get the lentil patty.
Yeah, I like lentil patties.
Lentil intervention.
Yes.
No, but just really quickly to put some figures on that. So the average Australian, their diet contributes 14.5 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per day. The global average is 6 kilograms. So that's a massive, massive difference between the global average. And then if we bring it back to the goals of halving all emissions to reach that 1.5 degree cap on warming, we've got a long way that we could improve in Australia and probably New Zealand. I don't know your figures. Sorry, Ben.
I was going to say, if Kiwis are getting all smug thinking, Aussies, well, I dare say if Kiwis it was even worse, to be honest. But probably on par, and it's probably the high dairy consuming nations and the high meat consuming nations. So, dare I say, if Australia's that high, New Zealand, probably the US, probably the UK,
Yeah. We're probably all relatively similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, like following on from that, Emma, is like, Christiana Figueres and Tom Rivett-Carnac, The Future We Choose. Have either of you seen that book?
No.
Oh, it's a fabulous book, really worth it. So these are the two people that really drove the Paris Agreement.
Okay.
So they are climate superstars and released a book last year. And one of the things it says is, so if we need to halve our global emissions by 2030, how do you halve yours? That's their question. And then they give you ideas. And one of the things is to, follow a, plant-based or very low-meat diet and use that as a way of, halving your own emissions.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
we'll hunt that down and put it in the show notes for anyone that's interested.
Great. Yeah. Another book to my list. So many good books to read.
I know. Okay. And so for eating, the next one is water.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
Yeah, water's precious. So we all need to act to conserve water. If you're a homeowner, then you can get a rainwater tank. Or, renters, you might be able to encourage your landlord to get a rainwater tank, depends on what your landlord's like. But also the urban design, like trying to have a garden that avoids runoff so that the water that when the rain falls, it stays in your garden rather than going out to oceans. A lot of councils do good work in this. There's quite a few councils in Adelaide that are doing good work about rainwater harvesting. But fundamentally appreciating that water is a risk with global warming and that we need to be aware of it. Yeah. Or saving shower heads, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
No,
we know in New Zealand it's a major issue when approximately 70% of our rivers are polluted. Like as I mentioned before, Auckland's currently still under water restrictions. It's impacting on the farms south of Auckland. It's it's most densely populated part of New Zealand, and tomato growers are suffering. So a lot of farmers, that's the impact. We're feeling it.
That's huge. Is that fundamentally because of nitrate poisoning and things from cattle feed? Like, why is the water?
No, water restrictions, just lack of rain.
No, the contamination.
Oh, the contamination. Yes. Yeah. Dairy farming predominantly. Yes.
Yeah.
So we had a freshwater ecologist, Dr. Mike Joy, take us through a really eye-opening sort of journey through all that, especially with his experience in South Island, with the sort of the more recent decades, the huge jump in the amount of dairy farming in the low plains, and the quality of the water just inversely going backwards, so it's been quite significant, but North Island as well. So yeah, whole of New Zealand and a lot of our lakes as well, freshwater lakes being impacted. So it's a big issue, but it's a big contributor to our economy. So
yeah, there's that old old argument again.
So,
and obviously in Australia we have the Murray-Darling Basin and all the awfulness that goes along with that. I was brought up in Broken Hill and sort of seeing the Darling River run dry and all the massive fish deaths that we had a summer or two ago is just, really confronting and really awful and a man-made problem. And, let's do better.
Yeah.
And a lot of the land-based issues also reflect back into the ocean as well. So, we've learnt about the Great Barrier Reef and the impact that the deforestation has on that. But, the oceans are absolute key because they absorb a lot of carbon as well.
Down carbon.
So anyway, water, super important, water, super precious.
I know. God,
and I'll have another sip of my beautiful tap water.
I'm trying to, the whole point is to leave this on an uplifting note so we all feel empowered.
Yes,
okay,
no more negativity.
Yeah, we're watering for our climate and we're going to plant for our climate. So we're going to get in the garden and we're going to plant trees to shade our house so that we don't need to use the air conditioner so much in summer. And we're going to try and grow our own veggies, and the more we do it, the better we'll get, so we're going to, get some skills about that. And we could maybe get involved with tree planting schemes, so there's lots of them out there. In South Australia, we have Trees for Life, which is this wonderful organisation that, you can grow trees, you grow up your little seedlings and then you give them to a landholder, a farmer, and they plant them. What a helpful thing to do. And so if we have the 1 trillion trees to save the planet, I've never done the maths, but, I'm going to try and plant as many as I can to make up my share of that. The next thing we can all do is power for your climate. So that's basically using a renewable energy provider. My electricity provider gets the vast majority of their energy from renewable sources. So that was as simple as changing my bill. Tick, easy thing to do, really low yield. Everybody can do that. Turn off the gas. Gas is not a transition fuel. Gas is a carbon bomb. So turning off the gas, if you can get panels and a battery, that's fabulous. Obviously, not everybody can afford that. And obviously for renters, that's a hard thing. But switching your bill. There's a link on my website to a number of renewable energy providers in Australia. So if people want to look that up, they can just click on that link. The next thing we can do is we can all transport for your climate. So walking and cycling, we've mentioned, they've got those healthcare co-benefits. As long as you're not walking down the main road, you're a couple of streets back, outside of the bus exhaust fumes. And, getting electric cars or electric vehicles. Obviously, electric vehicle entry level of electric car in Australia is about 50K, which is a big chunk of money for most people. But if you're a person who can afford $50,000 on a car, then buy an electric one.
But also, I think we just need to be a little bit educated there because, there's a lot of precious metals used for the electric vehicles. And, so from an ethical point of view, we just want to make sure that we don't just get an electric vehicle, that we actually do our research and get the right ones as well. So we don't want to cause, try and solve one problem and create a multitude of others. So I think it's just important to get the balance right.
Yeah, I think electric vehicle manufacture, you're right, there is some mining intensivity there, but the lifetime of the car, certainly of the electric vehicle, beats the internal combustion engine hands down because you don't have to buy petrol anymore.
Yeah, and that touches on a good point too. Like once you have that vehicle, don't just upgrade in 5 years for no good reason.
So not like an iPhone every 2 years, get a new car. It's got new features.
Yeah, I mean, consumerism is its own thing, isn't it? This whole thing of just getting for the want of getting. It's like, let's recycle, let's reuse things, let's not waste. Isn't that what David Attenborough said? The one thing that we could all do is not waste. The first thing, I think that's anything that man says is golden, I think. Okay, so transport. Obviously, flying is a big carbon bomb. And so, I have said in my thing, try not to fly. If you need to fly, maybe you want to offset it. You can tick that box.
Well, this year's an easy one, so we can all tick that box.
Well, this is it. We can all finance for your climate. So this is a low yield one too. Everybody can do this. So the divestment movement. So that's divesting your banking, your super or your insurance, all of that, taking your money out of financial institutions that lend to fossil fuel companies and putting them in ones that don't. Market Forces is a really good website that gives lots of information on that, but that's a simple thing to do. Just don't give them your money.
Great.
Yeah. And number 9 is vote for your climate. So it's vital we have a political response to the climate crisis. We need to compare the parties' climate policies and think climate when we vote. Talk to your politicians, get involved with political activity. Our politicians are there to represent us. So,
yes, exactly.
Yeah. So let's tell them what we think. Yeah. And the last one I have is act for your climate. And what that means is, ask yourself what you can do to help. What can you do to be involved? What skill can you bring to the table? Please look at my list and go through them. And, I wrote that list a year ago. At that time, I was working through the list. It's something that it's not something that you click your fingers and it happens overnight. It's something that we work through, knowing that we're, taking one step at a time. But yeah, what does each person have that they can bring to the table? For me, I'm lucky, I'm a GP, I have time, I have the capacity that I can do climate medicine. But, lots of people have lots of things that they can do. Are you a green thumb? Get out there and plant. Maybe you're really good with money. You can help your friends figure out this divesting thing. What is it that you've got that you can bring to the table? Because basically, here we are. Now is the time. Now is the time for us all to work together to save our planet. And, I truly believe that if we do it, if we work together, we can.
Now, as a GP, to other GPs and health professionals, do you have a specific message for them?
Yes, thank you. To other doctors listening, if you're not aware of the health effects of climate change, if you haven't kind of got your head around it, please check out my website, check out Doctors for the Environment, look at the Lancet Planetary Health Journal, and appreciate that climate change is a health issue, and appreciate that as doctors, we are going to be the ones who are going to be treating the health effects of climate change. It's going to increasingly become part of our day-to-day job. And we are a trusted voice in the community. People sometimes listen to doctors. I do like it when people listen to us. And, we are in every community across the world. And if you're advocating for action on climate change in your community, you can have a really powerful effect. You can really help make a difference to the climate crisis. And, it's our job to do it.
And if there's any health professionals listening and they want to find out more, you've got some webinars coming up very shortly.
Yes, Emma, I do. So I've got a Climate Change and Human Health Introduction to the Health Effects of Climate Change webinar. Tickets are via Humanitics. There's one next Tuesday, the 3rd, and another one next Thursday, the 5th. So there's still tickets available for the Thursday one. I think the Tuesday one's sold out now. But please come along. I will be repeating that. I'll probably repeat it again sort of early next year. Not advertised yet, but Doctors for the Environment is also putting one out on pollution. That'll be at the end of this month, and we've got one on climate and pregnancy.
Brilliant.
Mid-December. Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely amazing. Dr. Kate Wylie, thank you so much for giving up some of your precious time. This has been really it's a different angle. It's an important one. We know a lot of health professionals, especially GPs, they've got very limited time with their patients. It's always a common conversation point with trying to push or encourage a change in their way of eating for their health, their personal health. But you've certainly highlighted, in my mind, an even more important area. Emma and I have spoken about this a lot of times. You can focus on your personal health, but if there's no planet left, well, what's the point, sort of thing. But now it's also the converse effect. It's the ill effects of the planet and the direction it's going, the impact it has on our health as well. So, you've really brought to light a lot of key issues, but you've also put forward an amazing sort of list of action points that we can take. So thank you so much for sharing your passion and your knowledge.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for asking me to come along. I really enjoyed talking to you. And yeah, my last grab would be climate change is a health issue. We can treat it. Yeah. Thanks so much, guys. You two are great.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.